folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the concept of, definition of, and the role of the individual, the autonomous individual. Now, the definitions by various schools or ideologies of political thought, for example, the communists say, well, if we get rid of class, if we get rid of race, if we get rid of gender, and more recently in the modern iteration, we get rid of LGBTQ differences or perceived differences, then all that's left is the individual, and that's it. We now have a paradise where there's no difference between person A and person B, particularly not in regard to race, gender, and so on. Now, the communists also overlay another thing here, that in terms of this equality equity thing, is that no differences exist, is that the people who are capable of producing more or inventing more or harder workers, brighter people, more committed, those people, they should produce a surplus in their work, and that should be shared with people who are less capable, who are less physically able or less intellectually able, or less able for whatever the reason, and that the surplus produced by the brighter people should go to the less capable, and this then creates another form of equality. And again, all that's left is the individual, and the individual exists as an individual, but only in the sense that it contributes to the greater good. Now, you could argue that libertarians see it that way. For example, Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations believed that a form of, well, not necessarily equality, but wealth creation in which many could share, and thus a form of betterment, overall betterment, if not equality, is that the people who are capable of starting up a bakery, for example, remember he was writing this in the late 1700s. The idea is that people who could start businesses and create things, invent things, build things, they would, by virtue of their labours and their ingenuity, would provide goods and services more effectively and at a better price and so on than others. So therefore, they had almost a moral obligation to share their capabilities with others. Again, they bake nice loaves of bread and so on. This also, he sort of included in that market competition, that the baker down the road can't increase his prices, otherwise the customers will go to the baker up around the corner and so on. So market competition produces its own form of price control and its own form of quality control, that the customers, by their choice, will punish the baker that produces bread too expensively or at too poor a quality. So, and then you look at the libertarian nature of, say, the concepts produced by John Locke or Rousseau, or even sort of going back further than that. Even if you go back to, say, ancient Rome and Seneca and Cicero and those sort of people, how they would perceive the role of the individual, indeed the definition of the individual. So coming back to the communist definition of the individual, if we get rid of all the bad stuff, and it's very a childlike way of looking at things, very ideological, is we get rid of concepts of race, gender, and that sort of stuff. Then, and I'm thinking more of sort of Marxist communism in the late 1800s, going into the Soviet Bolshevik Revolution and so on. LGBTQ wasn't an issue then. So get rid of race, gender, and class, and then we have only the individual remains. Now, this is a very childish take on the world, where, well, if we just get rid of the bad things, then only the good things will be left. And South Park did a piss take on this in one of their episodes, where an 8-year-old Eric Cartman, or one of the characters, I think it was Cartman, said, well, the problem with the world is we've got too many poor people. well, why don't we just kill all the poor people? Then only rich people will be left, says I think it was could have been Kyle. And that's the sort of attitude, the idea that this sort of simplistic push button ideological take that the communists have. And you see around with you the feminists and the black activists and all the grifters around race and gender and so on. They all have this very simplistic thing. We'll just make it illegal for anyone to upset us and put the motherfucking Nazis in prison. That'll fix it. But of course, it does nothing of the sort and never was going to. Coming back to the individual then. So the communists say, well, the individual is whatever's left after we get rid of race, gender, and so on, class. But the individual might exist only in an ideological sort of sense. They don't exist in a practical sense, because the individual is subservient to the collective. So the individual is supreme when we look at race, gender, and class, but the individual has no autonomy or supremacy when we look at the collective, which is so it does a full circle really, or in communism, if you look at the ideological steps that it moves through. So trying to sort of raise class consciousness with people, as the communist agitators used to do, still do today, is to say, well, the reason that guy has that waterfront mansion with the hot chicks in the swimming pool, the reason for that is because of class. If we get rid of class, then you can have that swimming pool. And of course, to the simple mind, that means everyone's going to have a waterfront mansion with a swimming pool and hot babes swimming it. No, it's not how it's going. You can deprive someone of something, but you can't give everybody that same thing, the mansion and the pool. Physically, it just can't be done unless you can just create things out of thin air. But to the simple mind, yeah, that's right. You get rid of class and everyone's going to be equal. Well, no, they won't. But nonetheless, that's the idea. So the individual defined by communism is very different from the individual as perceived by John Locke or Adam Smith or Rousseau is probably closer to it, I guess, than communism than maybe Locke and those folks were. But the idea of the individual in say a supposedly libertarian society, and I'm not talking about the neo-libertarianism that we see today, but the idea of the individual is expressed in, say, their right to vote, for example, and that they actually have legal rights. They're equal before the law, whereas communism doesn't. You're not equal before the law in communism because an ideological overlay exists on the law, as we see today in the Daniel Penny case in New York. The prosecution and the behaviour of the prosecution of the state was to overlay ideology, and it was a race issue, not just a straight out crime issue or non-crime. And the Derek Chauvin thing, George Floyd, this was all as a result of ideological overlay. So if an individual has no legal rights, as in sovereign individual legal rights, they're not equal before the law. So that the law becomes sovereign, but it is administered with absolute and total impartiality. Then that confers on the individual their individual rights and autonomy. So the right to vote and the right to be equal before the law is probably a better definition of individuality. The right to, say, go to school. Those sorts of things. Now, the difference in not that there weren't overrides. For example, you could go to school in communist society, so that wasn't, and they were probably stricter about forcing you to go to school. But they saw school in the communist societies as ideological preparation as much as, if not more so, than an education in itself. Whereas in a libertarian or a liberty-based school, individual liberty-based school, the idea is that you have every opportunity to excel and are encouraged to do so, but there's no ideological overlay on things. And if it is, it's a soft ideology in terms of respecting your own community and your own nation state and things like that. Now, we're looking into, say, going to individuality, say, in the fascist regimes, and using the most popular one, the Nazis. The Nazis, this idea that the Nazis use mass compulsion is really quite mistaken. The number of secret police and agents and informers in the Nazi regime were relative to the communist societies were tiny. There's very few people. The people generally were permitted liberties, and the law applied. Now, if you were a homosexual, Jewish, Marxist, communist activist, then you wouldn't want to be counting on the law to protect you there. That wouldn't work out so well. If you were a homosexual gypsy Roma, then again the law wouldn't be much on your side. But for 99.4% of the population of Germany, then the law did exist, and people had legal rights before the law, and they had freedom of worship, for example, which you didn't have in the communist societies. The family was considered to be, a centerpiece of the state. Didn't attempt to replace the family, to supplement the family and play alongside it, sure, and even then, not to the full extent. So the idea of individual liberty and individual rights of property ownership, rights to a fair trial in court, and rights to choose your job, or all the rights for companies to hire who they wanted to, these sorts of things, the fascists or the Nazis had no problem with. So as we go through the spectrum, what is the individual and their role within the society or the collective in the case of the communists? Now, all of these people, all of these group ideologies purport to say the individual is most important. Now, again, whether it's through the communist definition of let's just take away class and race and everything like that, or whether it's the merit-based, everyone has the right to vote and everyone is equal before the law, those type of things. There are really the idea of the individual being held up as being the supposed, ultimate in expression of the health of a society. They all really claim the same thing, but asserting it and practicing it are different things. When things are clearly codified in law, then it tends not to be what an individual is or how the individual is to exist, or their relationship to the whatever collective may exist, whether that collective is ideological or expressed through codified law. All claim the individual is there, but the only expression of an individual that certainly I can see, and one that we've almost lost in the West, hopefully the administration of President Trump can return that, and take away the ideological overlay on everything that exists, which turns individuality into an absolute farce and junks, the idea of equality for the law and the right to vote in free and fair elections. The globalists were taking all of that away from us. Hopefully, this can be restored with the incoming Trump administration. But coming back to the idea of the individual, the idea of the individual reached its zenith, I believe, in the West during the Cold War, and or particularly the latter stages of it, where the equality before the law and the right to vote in free and fair elections and a merit-based access to social mobility, these were the ultimate expressions of the individual. And I think that's really the only reasonable definition of an individual and the rights of an individual, and to say that the individual has primacy and autonomy in a society, then I think that's been the only expression of it. And again, I think we almost lost it. You've been a Tassos today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.